And just to confirm, some noise on my background. Are you guys hearing it, or it's okay for you to hear me? Can you guys hear me well?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to LATAM Green Energy's platform on inclusion and diversity. Thank you to LATAM Green and to our three leaders that we have as panelists today, María José, Cortes from Atlas, and Ana Carolina from Dow, and Stephanie from the IDB. In today's panel, we're going to be discussing how our organizations can sponsor diversity and inclusion, and especially in how this has been applied to the energy sector, but also how the example that this trifecta brings to the table can be applied to other industries as well. So on our first round, I'd just like to start with very brief introductions, 30 seconds each. Why don't we start with you, María José?
Yes, thank you, María José. My name is María José Cortes, and I'm the head of ESG for Atlas Renewable Energy. We're a second largest solar generator in Latin America and currently operating in Brazil, Mexico, Chile, and opening new markets in the US and Colombia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, María José, and thank you for being here. Stephanie?
Thank you, María José. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being us this afternoon. I'm Stephanie Oueda Cruz, and I lead the Gender, Diversity, and Inclusion team at IDB Invest. IDB Invest is part of the Inter-American Development Bank, and we finance the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean to accelerate economic and social development in our region. Delighted to be here this afternoon and to share more about why diversity and inclusion is good for business.
Thank you. Welcome. Ana Carolina?
Thank you, María José. So my name is Felix. I am from Dow. Dow it's a chemical company. We are around for more than 100 years with a lot of portfolios for a lot of different segments. I currently have the Latin America responsibility. I am the senior product manager for the Dow Consumer Solutions Feedstocks operation. And I'm also the Brazil leader for the Women's Inclusion Network we have. It's one of the ERGs we have, and it's a pleasure to be here and talk about this subject today.
Thank you, Ana Carolina. So, I mean, to start, we all know how ESG is so important nowadays, right, for an organization to be sustainable in the long run. It's been proven that all of these different elements in ESG really contribute to the long-term sustainability of an organization. So one of the main challenges around the G aspect of governance is precisely diversity and inclusion. And I like to start out the panel by having one of our panelists explain to us what exactly is diversity and inclusion to you. Anybody wants to start?
Sure, I can go. So diversity, and I would even add equity and inclusion, is for us um, a business imperative, but as well as social imperative. So diversity would be bringing individuals that are very different from each other, and those could be characteristics that are visible, such as ethnicity, race, gender, sometimes age, but also invisible, right? We can talk about social diversity, experience of diversity. So bringing all of these diverse point of view to the table. But nothing would be useful if we don't create an inclusive environment. And that is actually a key part for any organization, which would be creating an environment where everybody feels really included, respected, that they can bring their ideas to the table and that those ideas will be heard. And equity will be the key piece that will allow that we actually give everyone the right treatment depending to their situation. And if companies or institutions work around this, we actually have a more productive institution, company, and therefore better results.
Thank you, Stephanie. So basically, inclusion, equity, diversity, it all focuses on the individual. It all focuses on the person, and organizations are made of people. So what does it mean, and what does this entail to bring in equity, diversity, and inclusion for an organization? María José or Ana Carolina?
Well, for me, this is my personal stand, but it's shared with Atlas, of course, is around, this is something we say in other forums as well, that progress is not progress if it's not for everyone, and if not everyone benefits from it. So I guess the approach that we are giving to D&I within the company has a lot to do with social justice, and the fact that we as large companies generating all these profits are kind of responsible in terms of social justice for guaranteeing that access to growth and to better life conditions for everyone. So I guess that's the frame that we have within the company. I think more and more the world is proving that D&I is not anymore like a nice to have thing, but it's actually something we must do. So I guess that's it. Ana Carolina, I don't know if you want to add something.
To add, Maria Jose, I think you said some really interesting things. And to add, I think we need to be intentional, right? When we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's just not only setting the target, but you need to be intentional every step on the way. So, for example, for us, we wanted to increase the diversity piece, right? So we wanted to have more representativeness within DAO, and we learned that we had to be intentional in our process, right? So if you want to have more women, you need to find those women, because in the past there was a lot of bias that there wasn't women that were technical qualified for STEAM areas, so for the chemical areas or engineering, and that's not the case anymore. You have the talent, but you need to be intentional about how you do your process. So for example, we started changing how the interviews are done, and you always have to have at least a balance on gender, right? If you have one male, you have to have one female on the panel, 2 males, 2 females. If we open a job posting internally, it stays open for 2 weeks, but if you don't have any women on the people that apply to the role, you have to let it open for another week. So those type of things, they started with the intentionality. And when we talk about equality, we want a fair game. It's not that we are benefiting anyone, we want a fair game. So I think intentionality, it's really important, and understanding historical barriers that you might have. So for example, we wanted to increase the number of Black people within DAO here in Latin America. And we would say that there wasn't that many people applying for the trainee process, for example. And we learned for Latin America specifically, the language could be a barrier, because we asked people to speak English. And a lot of those people, at least here in Brazil, they didn't have the same opportunities. So it's not fair for you to expect that they are going to have like this great degree and had the opportunity to learn English. A lot of times they didn't have the opportunity to live abroad. So we learned that by not asking for the English as a requirement, because you can learn English, right? And not all the roles you need that. We actually saw that was a way to be intentional about being more inclusive, right? So I think you need to set the goals, you need to have the high level leadership engagement, but you also need to be intentional in all the steps.
Oh, definitely. I think right now that intentionality or that consciousness is critical, right? To design the processes internally within our operations, within all of the different departments, to really establish a business culture where that consciousness is present. Because if we're lacking that, we can fall into the cultural barriers that we have, especially in our region in Latin America, and that we're all fighting against. And especially because we have all of these very strong women really pushing for D&I within their own organizations, but it's really a team effort, right? It's really not only an organizational effort, but also an industry effort. And slowly we'll start achieving what is important and what is correct. Now, there are some industries that are more male dominated than others, right? Where culturally this is how it's been done forever. And we have the chemical and the energy sectors being some of those most prominent industries to have this cultural I guess tag to it. So what are the different challenges that your industries have? And let's start with the chemical, Ana Carolina. What do these industries face when implementing D&I?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because a lot of times in the chemical, the energy sector, the mining sector, there is a lot of times that you hear that there is specific jobs that are not for women. Oh, it's just too it's too heavy, this work for a woman to do it. And what we say in the inside DAO is like safety for us is really important. So it's heavy. If it's heavy for a woman to do it, it's heavy for a man as well. So it should not be done that way, right? So there is a lot of this historical culture bias that we have to address. And besides setting the goals, as we talked about, so the company needs to be committed to it. And as everyone already talked about, is not only the right thing to do from a social perspective, but it's also something that brings result to the company. There is a lot of studies that show that more inclusive companies are more innovative, they deliver more results, right? So when we talk about companies that historically have a lot of males in the leadership, because it's just natural, right? You have people usually in the leadership that have 10, 20, 30 years in the company. It's really important the allies that they understand that they need to be allies, and they need to understand how important an ally is. And that's not only for women. When we talk about diversity and inclusion overall, right? The allies are really important. And a lot of times they are in a room that you don't have a woman there, and they need to be an ally, and they need to be a sponsor. We know that that's another really important piece as well. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, especially on our WIN team, we talk about increasing the hiring and attraction of women. It's important for you to attract those women, but then it's important for you to retain that talent as well. So we talk a lot about advancing the career of those women, and can be through trainings, mentoring. We have a networking programs. We have the sponsorship program as well. We also talk about the allies engagement, right? So as I mentioned, it's important for the allies to understand how important they are, and how it's important for them to take action. And it's everyone's problem. It's not that minority team problem. We also talk a lot about the culture of inclusion. So you need to have respect, right? You need to set the standards of the company and the values of the company. They need to exist on all levels. And it's on your manufacturing side, on your operation side, on your board rooms. You need for the values to be all across the company. And then we also have the external impact. We work a lot on making sure that we are known externally by our diversity and inclusion agenda, so we can not only learn from other companies, but also share the best practices we are doing, and also trying to attract those women as well. So I would say that, in summary, because there is a lot more to talk about that. But in summary, I think those are the most important aspects to be addressed and the challenges within the industry.
And I think that's all of those challenges that you mentioned is applicable to every single industry, right? I mean, there are particularities, but that's really what we see in the energy industry as well. For example, María José, what type of policies are being created to make this effort be successful, thinking about the renewable energy industry? You're on mute.
Thank you. The Ana Carolina's intervention got me thinking that there are indeed a lot of similarities within the chemical industry and the renewables. Of course, a huge gap between the actual training and career development of women within the renewable energy industry, although there's very good examples, and I think in the pandemic maybe some of the webinars and forums, you're getting to see a lot more women, speaking up and participating in different forums. Stephanie Oueda actually taught me a while ago this phrase that was stuck in my head, which is, you cannot be what you cannot see. So I guess within the renewable energy industry, I think we're getting to see more women in certain roles. More in regulation, more in engineering, but I think we can still push a little bit further. In terms of policies, I'm not sure we're there yet in terms of policies. I do see good practices though, and I do see in the renewable energy industry more clients and financial institutions that are challenging us and helping us as, let's say, as Atlas generators, moving the bar higher. And one other challenge that I wanted to share, just to put on the table, is in terms of talent retention. As Ana Carolina was saying, I guess there's still a gap that needs to be addressed eventually on motherhood. I don't know if you've heard or seen this like analysis trend about gender pay gap being real, of course, but motherhood pay gap being the harshest one. So I think eventually that's something that within the renewable energy industry we need to address. I know within Atlas that's something that our people department is looking on heavily. Having different benefits for not just for mothers, but for parents in general, so that even men who are parenting at the moment within Atlas can benefit from certain things, and that will impact their spouses. So I guess that's kind of the stuff that's going on in the renewable energy industry.
Thank you, María José. And Stephanie, what are what solutions besides policies, or what are those good practices that María José was mentioning that are being considered in the finance banking sector? Is it really all that different? Because when I see the lists, for example, of the participation of women in boards, for example, finance and banking is the industry that has one of the most, robust or the greatest number of women's participating on boards, which is the highest level you can have in an organization. So I think your industry is a little bit more advanced and less, I guess, not confronting as much these cultural barriers. But how do you see it? I mean, this is me from the outside.
No, absolutely. And from the Inter-American Development Bank and IDB Invest, we are in a very privileged position because, as you very well said, we are part of the financing, the banking sector, but we finance all sectors of the economy. So we do see what's happening across the different, areas. We see what's happening in the digital economy. We see what's happening in the energy sector, what's going on in the tourism sector. So we do see a couple of elements. So I'd like to start by saying that in Latin America, as Ana Carolina and María José were mentioning, we face several challenges as a region, right? The participation of women in the workforce, the gender roles that we have, the cultural norms that we face all across the region that translate in basically any sector, what is the role of a woman versus what is the role of a man. And although with time and with different policies, we're advancing and expanding those roles and social norms, it's still very rooted. What have we seen in the financial sectors? Effectively, we do have a good representation of women across the board, but we're not there yet. Sadly, Latin America and the Caribbean, we are the region with the lowest percentage of women in leadership across all sectors. We are behind regions such as Southeast Asia or even Africa. So we do still have some work to do in those aspects. Another important topic that I wanted to highlight while listening to my colleagues is, so what can we do? So Ana Carolina mentioned a lot of the concrete steps that any company, regardless of the sector, can take, right? So how are you recruiting? What are the words that you're mentioning? Everything around your career progression. Maria Jose mentioned, so as of last Sunday, which was International Equal Pay Day, women across the world were working for free, right? Out of that day forward, the gender pay gap, it's actually really enforced. But I think that something that we need to keep in mind while we are working in establishing a lot more of opportunities for basically the majority across the board is beyond the policies. What do you need? And I think you need strong leadership. Whenever you're talking about dynamics of diversity and inclusion, you're actually talking about dynamics of power, because who has the power and who wants to share that power of decision, power of being at the table. And those structures do not change easily. It needs to go over time. The magical number that we see across studies is 30%, and that's why you hear a lot of time the minimum of 30%, for example, of women in boards, 30% of people in leadership. Because when you have, let's say, only one woman, that woman can be perceived as a token, right? Like, oh, but she's saying this because she's a woman. If you have two women, they might say, oh, but they're supporting each other, they're doing their little group. But if you have three women, then you start looking at the individual, and it starts really being a whole self. So that's why we have some specific, let's say, numbers that we want to achieve in terms of moving the needle. So you definitely have the policies, and my colleagues mentioned that. But the second element I would say is really, how do you make those actionable? How do you ensure that people across the company are using them? A lot of companies now have parental leave, not maternity or paternity, but really paternal or caregiver. So starting to have that and having the leadership actually doing that and walking the talk, it's something very important. I'll just finish by saying that for us at IDB Invest, we are EDGE certified, which is a gender certification. And we did that because, first of all, we want to walk the talk. And whenever we're talking to clients, for example, when we were speaking with Atlas, how could we tell them to go somewhere if we haven't done it ourselves, right? In our leadership, we also have 50% women and 50% men. So we have a gender balanced leadership team. And that's not only because we think it's the right thing to do, but because it really brings that diversity of ideas, of opinions to the table. And at the end, we end up with a better solution for our clients and then for the region.
So I have a couple of questions that came to me while you were speaking. One is, as a financial institution, so right now we're looking at these ESG principles being applied for financing to be more attractive, because that's what clients want, because companies are being audited, because that's what all stakeholders are asking for, because everybody in terms of financing is taking a good look at every organization, right? So do you think the pressure is really helping? Because if you think about quotas, for example, right, in terms of women being on boards, there needs to be a certain number of women. I hate quotas, personally, but they really help because they make people conscious, they make organizations conscious, and it's a first step, right? So this pressure that's actually being applied by financial institutions, because when companies right now go to a bank and or to an investment fund and request financing, 30% of the time when you're sitting there, you're talking about ESG. And that's the importance that's being given. So Stephanie, in your eyes, do you think that's helping?
It's an excellent question, Maria Jose, and I think it's definitely is. And I think that it's not only having pressure from one side, but it's really how society is changing, right? So we are talking about LATAM Green, right? 10, 15 years ago, companies were seeing sustainability, were not even addressing this topic, or it was, something really small on the side. Uh, Time passed by, we have seen that this is again not only something for our NGOs or our stakeholders, but it's really part of our business on being actually to be able to survive as companies in the future. The same thing happened around diversity and inclusion. This is not a new topic, and if you think about how diversity, equity, and inclusion came to be, it started in the United States around the 60s, right, when you had all of the civil rights starting. And why am I mentioning this? Because we have seen a huge jump into these topics for the last 2-3 years in particular. And something that is interesting to move there is definitely for change to happen, you need to have an influx of different factors. For companies, the consumer pressure is one. Consumers more and more want to know, how was my product produced? Who did it? Was it in fair conditions? What happened? So companies were already having this pressure. And that's why when you talk about diversity and inclusion, consumer-facing companies were the ones that started at first and are actually really at the forefront of those efforts because they had the pressure from their consumers. Then what happens? Then it comes that you have also the pressure and from your stakeholders, right? The different NGOs or relevant actors in your field. So that was already in the game and things started to come. And also society as a whole has become more educated and demanding more of these topics. And now, as very well said, also the financial sector is looking at that. But the financial sector is not looking at this only for let's put pressure. They are actually really seeing that this has an added value. If you have companies that have that diverse leadership, they will have higher returns. McKinsey has shown that you have gender diversity at leadership levels, you can have up to 15% higher returns. And if you add racial diversity, up to 35%. So if I am a bank and I can invest in a company that has diversity, it's also because they're going to have better returns over time. So this is definitely something that is happening. For companies, it's also about better reputation, right? Like if you are being a company that is responsible, that it's actually paying attention not only from a climate perspective, but from a social perspective, your sustainability strategies hand in hand with your business strategy, and that's where we're going. So definitely it helps when you move as an industry, and that's why today an event such as the one you are all putting together, it's wonderful because the green energy sector, the infrastructure sector, we're not going to get far if we don't act as an industry. I've been working in this field for over 15 years now, and in past lives we always used to say we can be competitors in the shelf, but in these topics we need to move together as industries.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's great intel feedback. So what I do is I support large energy consumers design, negotiate, and implement energy supply strategies, and that goes hand in hand with sustainability. And what you said about how the consumer end of the industries are pushing more for the sustainability is completely on point, because what we started to see was retailers, especially, all coming from corporate, really drilling down on you have to be sustainable. And the interesting part of it is, how do you really apply sustainability and all these different aspects, diversity, inclusion, to the different regulations and to the different cultures around the world? So Maria Jose, what do you see in terms of, you're a renewable energy company, developer, generator. What do you see in terms of, do the corporates, are they trying to to I guess, make other some of their companies in other parts of the world, subsidiaries, understand why this is important? Where is it starting? Where is that head? Is it in the corporate side? Is it in a department? Where is it? Where does it start?
So I guess maybe it's a mixture, but definitely the leadership. Just like Stephanie mentioned before. I guess sometimes, or a lot of times, and speaking from on the Atlas side, the genesis is maybe within the ESG or sustainability areas. But I think the fact that maybe, the personal values of those individuals in those areas with the leadership, and the fact that they are in sync, that's crucial. The role CEOs and boards are crucial as well, because from that, all the culture cascades to the rest of the organization, subsidiaries, clients, subcontractors, etc. And so when there's like let's say, public endorsement of a D&I culture, public statements, public collaborations, it's like an expansion wave. I guess, yes, the main point is about the leadership teams, C-suite positions, CEOs, to start getting that expansion wave started, and of course ESG areas plus communications areas plus HR people areas, as the main executors of the strategies. And other thing that I think is crucial is to advance in both ways. The more the D&I culture is lived every day within a corporate environment, the more that people will implement it in their work. So to put an example, if within Atlas, the D&I culture is like lived every day for everyone, we keep making it better every day, but everybody's living it, breathing it. It doesn't matter. I'm not, as head of ESG and my team, we're not going to be alone when negotiating an EPC contract, for example, because I know that the engineering team folks plus the development, business development folks are going to be there by our side, negotiating those things that will be non-negotiable for us. This is our base, and from here, higher. Never going back to the way business was done before. So I guess that's kind of how the expansion wave starts. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, definitely. It has to start at the top and then come down, and permeate that culture, that need. And something that was said earlier, the recognition that this will actually provide value, 15% of additional value, is what's crucial, right? This is what'll drive people coming in and to support this initiative, and it'll just be normal.
And maybe we're going to go deeper into that, I know, but adding value in the long term, in terms of productivity, but in terms of maybe immediate or short-term benefits, I think the example we're going to talk about is perfect. On one side, we know our commercial offer, for example, with Dow as providers of energy, had that added value of D&I was for them very attractive. They had this appetite of having a more diverse and a better supply chain in terms of energy, plus the blended finance negotiations that we did with IDB, led by Stephanie. So in terms of value creation, not just in terms of making our supply chain greener or more fair or more social justice fair, but also business, in terms of business value. That's something that I think we should talk about.
Awesome. Just a reminder to all the audience, there's a chat there on your right side where you can send in questions. We're going to have some minutes for questions at the end. We still have 2 rounds to go in terms of questions to the panelists, but please start sending them in, and I will try to address every single one of them if we have time. So, María José, you started mentioning in this collaboration between organizations, and one of the solutions that your companies, the 3 companies, decided to design, implement, finance is the female workforce program called We Are All Part of the Same Energy, which is very inspirational. And I'd like to get into that because all 3 companies are connected through shared values and an inclusive vision, right? They're 3 companies from different industries. And this is something critical because I'd like for everybody to see this as an example, as if collaboration really does multiply value, right? And how we can replicate this into other different industries. So if y'all can tell me, how did this happen? What are the values that your companies represent that provoked this collaboration? We can start from there. Ana Carolina, if you want to start.
Sure, I can comment. So we were talking about the importance of being diversity, having diversity within the company, right? But in DAO, we started a discussion that it needs to go beyond internally, right? It's okay, you are doing your job, you are increasing the representativeness of minorities within your company, but you need to look abroad. You need to look beyond that, because we are saying as big companies, we have a lot of impact on the value chain. So on the communities where we act, right, where we have our operations, we have the opportunity to be more inclusive there, and also influence by talking with the community about it. And we also see that opportunity on our supply chain. We saw that there was a lot of opportunities for us to influence a lot of our supply chains, not on this case here of this project, but on other value chains. We have medium and small companies that unless we are talking about it, unless we are saying that it's a necessity, it's not something it's going to happen as fast as we are seeing in bigger companies. So I think from a corporate perspective, we understand that it's important for us to be more inclusive and be intentional about how we make the decisions on the projects we are investing in, and how we are choosing our suppliers. So I think this project is an example that we were able to find 3 stakeholders and 3 companies that were interested on the same goal and had the aligned values. And as you mentioned, it just potentializes even more, right? Because it's what we like to say, it's 1 + 1, it's not 2, right? In this case, we can just see the impact of potentializing when you have companies with similar values coming together for projects such as this one.
María José, if I can go next. So from IDB Invest, as I said, we finance different projects, right? When the project with María José and Atlas came on board, we saw a great opportunity to really continue our work of including more women in non-traditional roles, to include more women into renewable energy, and as we said, really have this sustainable approach, right? So renewable energy, more women. And then we had the first conversation with María José and her team. And we saw that they were not only committed to do what we were, working on, but they wanted to go to the next level. We were talking about leadership, and Carlos Barrera Ucho, the CEO of Atlas, was totally a big sponsor and actor in this, right? We spent a lot of time with different companies, but few times do you see a CEO really sitting down, wanting to understand how his company could get to the next level. And this is something that happened at Atlas. So I really want to say that they are absolutely one of the key players in moving this important agenda in the renewable energy sector. Not only, and I will let María José really explain through the amazing program that they put together, not only did we work with them on including again more women in different roles, transmitting skills, working around the community as well, because it's very important for most from a development bank that whenever there's a project, something stays for social and economic development. But we also went with minorities, right? We said this is going beyond, and Atlas and María José will share about this, really went up and above in reviewing policies, creating specific programs, including women, women of color, men of color, so that this could really be into the fabric of the project, into the fabric of the community. We did use specific financial instruments, to support them and go forward, but the level of impact and the level of commitment that we have seen from them is rare, and I really want to acknowledge that and really congratulate them, because they are setting an example, and hopefully the whole industry will follow. And I mean, of course, we're happy to support, but I really want to say that not only the leadership with Ucho and his team, but also the amazing work that María José, her team, colleagues have made really makes a big difference. And with that, María José, I think you can explain more in depth what is this program about that everybody, I'm sure, wants to know.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, for the kind words. And I must say that you, of course, and the team that you lead have been crucial in challenging us. I remember that maybe it was the fourth or fifth time that we talked. You were like, "Are you ready for this? I'm going to challenge you," and we were like, "Yeah, bring it on." So yeah, what we did was in 2019 we had a pilot project in which we tried to include in a project that was under construction in Brazil to raise the number of women working within the workforce. There was very few, maybe 2 or 3, and some women working in the kitchen and in cleaning activities. After that pilot project, we benchmarked the number of women working in the workforce within all the projects that we had in Latin America, and in the industry in general, along with renewable energy associations. And we saw that it was between 1% and 2% of women participating in the workforce. So that number, across with the fact that in terms of public policy, it has it's proven that the more you allocate resources to women, that money is better distributed within the family and for different needs, and for we spend on strategic stuff that family needs that leads towards growth, economic growth within communities. Then COVID came along, and it was even more. We knew we had a role to play in terms of economic recovery. So we started this program full in 4 operational projects, 2 in Brazil, 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Chile. And we divided it in like 4 main areas, which was training, to close the gap that I was talking about in terms of capacity building for women and capacities that could be used after the projects were built in other type of industries, or even in the renewable energy industry within those areas. We'll know, where a project is, if the solar or wind resource is good, other projects might come. And so, building a workforce of women that could have those capacities for us was an added value. Second, and of course, employment. So what we do is we train these women, we employ them, and through many different resources that we had to actually kind of discover in the making. Because what we found out is that there's a lot of resistance in the industry when it comes to hiring women, and resistance because we found, for example, our EPC companies. It's different now, but at the beginning they were like, "But how am I going to hire them? What if they're not as productive as men? What if production comes down because I'm hiring all these women?" And we wanted to raise the bar from 1% to 15 to 20%. So EPC companies were worried about this. And now we know with results that those projects in which the number of women that we wanted have been working, they're a lot more productive, and they have a lot less accidents, for example. So production actually comes up. And so, we've come to the conclusion that it's all about unconscious biases that become barrier after barrier. for doing this. So what we want to do also is build capacity within our allies and within our providers to say, hey, if you want to work with me, with Atlas, this is going to be the standard. You can actually do it, by heart, or or you can fight it, but we're going to do it. So it was that employment. Then guaranteeing that within the areas that we were, high schools and middle schools have STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math trainings for girls, and for those careers to be appealing for them. Again, you cannot be what you cannot see. So bringing those to schools was a must for us, or is a must for us, and is an activity that could prevail in the long term of our operations. And lastly, all of the support that we can give for talent retention, as Ana Carolina was saying. So the fact that we did have a lot of support for women to come to the training process and then to come work within our projects by giving them like childcare during the hours in which they were working, that was crucial. Because plus that's something that Atlas does at the corporate level. So taking that value and that benefit, not just for the corporate people, but also for the women in our projects. That was crucial for retaining them and showing a possibility of work as something plausible for them. So I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell. Now we're in the process of finishing many of those projects, and the next challenge that's coming is, okay, how are we going to make sure that all these women can find employment after, either if it's within another of our projects or with another company or with another industry. But what we want to make sure is that that capacities that we helped to build prevails in the area. So that's kind of it. And what we found is that the deeper we go into our supply chain, let's say tracker suppliers have been like super on board with us, Next Tracker, in helping women, for example, specific trainings for panel installation and tracker installation. They were like, hey, we like that program, like let's get on board with this. And I think what we want to do, and actually we're making like a good practices manual along with IDB, is we want to share the formula. Like there's no point in doing this and just keeping it for us. Like maybe someone else or some other company might come and make it better. Like that's awesome. So this forum, the manual that we're publishing, that's kind of it. We want to share what we did and to make others can follow this path.
Extremely interesting. I'm sure you really condensed everything that you have been doing in a nutshell. I congratulate the three of the companies. I think what you're doing is exemplary. And one thing, how did this happen? I mean, why did your companies think complementing each other would be more valuable than navigating independently? Anybody want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I can start and perhaps whenever you want to move the needle and really change something in the long term and from a holistic perspective, which actually will bring real change, you cannot act alone, right? You need to really find the right partners, bring coalition, tap into each other's strength, and as Maria Jose said, really share the word, right? So the recipe that we came up with, it's widely open. From an IDB Invest perspective, what we found was a great company to partner with, to pilot initiative, and then to be able to escalate. But I think this is something that we can see all across the board. Everybody has different expertise, everybody has a different point of view, and that's also what makes the discussion extremely rich and powerful, right? So we're also learning from the lessons learned from what we are seeing to be able to then replicate that across the board. But when you really want to achieve something big, you cannot do it by yourself.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the intentionality we're talking about. I think it's important to set targets and follow up on targets. And we talk a lot about important things that I think in the end of the day are translated on projects like this one, right? You need to have the high level leadership engaged. You need to set the targets, and you need to track the targets in the same way you track other targets in the business, right? For example, on my role, I have the P&L responsibility. So you track the financial results, you track the volume production, you track the safety numbers, you need to track the diversity and inclusion numbers as well, right? So I think the first thing is that you need to have the commitment. Then you start talking about how can you implement on that. And then you start thinking about actual projects that you can do it. And like Maria José was mentioning, I think it's great. We always have to challenge the status quo. So people are saying, but it has been always done like that. But why cannot it be different? Do we need to attract those people to work on the project? How can we retain those people? How we make sure that we are setting them for success, right? And then what Stephanie mentioned, and I agree 100%. It's when you're doing it with other companies, when you are leveraging it across the industry, it's when you potentialize even more the projects, right? So I think someone mentioned before, when you talk about diversity and inclusion, there is no competition. And I think that's true, even within the industry, because like Maria José was mentioning, they learned a lot, specifically regarding a project of building an asset like the asset that we had for this project. And the same thing for us in the chemical industry, like we leverage the work around the industry as well. And that is even more true when you're talking about your value chain and other stakeholders and partners in your value chain.
Thank you, Ana Carolina. So how can others find ways to push for these diversity inclusion initiatives and work towards a more inclusive future? I mean, what challenges did you face, and what value share can you provide to the audience to make sure that what you learned can be replicated? As you say, you need to share with the audience to be able to make it or to multiply the effect or this benefit from the work you already did.
Yeah, I think I can comment. I think it's true for ESG overall, right? Now that we are seeing a lot of engagement around the subject, everyone wants to say that they are diverse, that they have these targets. I think it's important to have meaningful targets and have a governance structure to make sure you are able to implement, and also making sure that you are working with bold enough goals, because that's the other thing, defining targets that you're going to be able to deliver, that should not be the path. I think besides that, for companies to start, right, let's say you don't have anything, you want to start talking about it, I think having ERGs is an important thing to also accelerate the process, because then you have the leadership defining the targets and the leadership talking about how important it is, but you also have the affinity groups that can help you cascade faster the knowledge. They can bring to the discussion what really makes sense to them. So, for example, Stephanie mentioned about one important thing about how you hire people, right? Sometimes how you describe the role makes all of the difference. And we, as part of the ERG groups we identified that specifically on one of our operations in Minas Gerais in Brazil, that we wanted to hire more women. And we saw that by the fact that we are saying operators in women felt like they couldn't apply, right? So I think if I had to give one advice would be to have the ERGs. If I can have 3, it would be set the targets, have the governance, and have the ERGs.
I guess on my side, I would say, and for companies like us, first is like start the conversation. Like why do we want to do it? Why is it important? How is it bringing value? So I guess first a conversation within the leadership, heads of sustainability, ESG, people, department, HR, etc. Second, I would say maybe if it's in a very early stage, it helps to build what I call like an ecosystem. So like, for example, us three are an ecosystem, and we had like very good synergy. But also maybe even if it's certain resistance at the beginning, I say like an enforcement ecosystem. Why? Because sometimes from the financing side, lots of commitments, and let's think of regular project finance. There's some projects and some studies and some stuff that companies must do when the financial institutions ask for them. So I would say, for example, my peers like to leverage D&I programs with the financial institutions they work with, at least for the beginning, until it becomes natural and until it becomes part of the culture. And third, I would say collaboration in between areas within the company. So for me, it has been very good to work very closely to the HR department, but also to the structured finance area, because they're always looking for diverse, like green financing or social, green bonds, social bonds, blue bonds, etc. So that helps a lot to leverage D&I programs. But also with the commercial team, it hasn't. If it wasn't for the commercial team that reached out to Dow's supply chain and sustainability area, we wouldn't be talking directly with Ana Carolina. So that collaboration, across areas in which you build like inner champions of D&I, that's one thing that I would definitely advise for.
Thank you, María José. Last question: is there any, and this one's specifically for Stephanie, is there any index or data set covering percentage of women in company boards or companies or boards of companies available in Latin America? I, on my end, know that there are a couple of programs. For example, the IPADE Business School in Mexico just launched the first program 2 days ago in terms of women on board. So they have a very good analysis of how much participation we have. It's very bad. I mean, we have 8% in Mexico women on boards, and 2.2%, I think, are independent board members in the Mexican Stock Exchange, basically, La Bolsa Mexicana de Valores and Viva. And it's kind of the same for Latin America. There's some companies that have a little bit more, 6% Chile, more or less, a little bit less. But in general, I mean, we're not doing very well. There's other companies like Women for Boards. There's companies like 50/50 Women. I mean, there's organization, women corporate directors, that have a lot of these studies that even go deep enough to divide by industries. And that's where I saw where, in terms of the financial institutions, that's actually where there's most representation. And in the energy sector is where we have less. So, Stephanie, anything else you want to add there?
No, I think you mentioned a lot of the big names and where you can find most of the all holistic overview data of LATAM. So, Women on Boards 50/50. You also have really good reports that Spencer Stuart does, the consulting firm. I really like as well Catalyst. They have a snapshot on LATAM, and you can benchmark it with other parts of the world. We also have the INTAL, which is, one of the institution of research of Latin America, part of the IDB. And we actually just launched a report that it's called the Unequal Olympics, Las Olimpiadas Desiguales. And we can see that, women in leadership positions, it's still both at board, at VP levels, and leadership with P&L responsibilities, we're quite behind, 15% only in LATAM. So I would definitely recommend those reports. And you also have other type of organizations that are pushing the needle so that there are more women on boards. You have the 30% Club that is recently arriving to Latin America, entering through the financial sector, as you said, Majo. It's in Mexico, it's in Colombia. You also have Women on Boards headquartered in Sao Paulo, which is very big and very potente, very powerful in Brazil. So there's a couple of resources. And perhaps just to finish, and I see that we have to wrap up, one of the particularities of our region is that we have a lot of family-run firms. So that's also something that it's different if we're not on the stock exchange, etc. So that's a particularity as well. And maybe the next panel that we will get together could be about women in leadership and women on boards. But those are some of the resources that I would recommend.
Thank you, Stephanie. So Latin America clearly has a challenge. We're very behind in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity. And these large companies generating these big numbers in terms of economics do have the responsibility of replicating this benefit to provoke this social justice that we've been talking about, right? Not only externally, but to be coherent, we need to start on the inside, right? So we need to consider designing processes in our operations, in our business culture, starting at the top, permeating all the way down in our recruiting processes. And not only that, we need to have allies, right? We need internal groups to be monitoring and managing these efforts, trying to understand how it is that we can collaborate with other institutions, because we even though we're competition in these aspects, these elements in the world, we are not competition. We need to all work together. All this effort has an end goal, and it's proven that more innovation, more diversity, and more inclusion makes business sense, right? So there you have it. I mean, these three strong women set an example. And to quote two of the panelists, you cannot be what you cannot see. Well, everyone now sees it. This can be replicated because we are all part of the same energy, right? We all do come from different industries. We come from different cultures. We have diverse beliefs, different sexes, but we're all one same energy. And we need to keep pushing and focus on making our organization successful and diverse and inclusive. So thank you all very much for such a rich discussion. Thank you, Atlas, for leading this panel, and LATAM Green for putting this together. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.